The Bitcoin Group, the American original. For over the last 10 years, the sharpest Satoshis, the best Bitcoins, the hardest cryptocurrency talk. We'd like to welcome our panelists, Ben Ark from LN Bits,
Hello, all. Good evening.
Victoria Jones from Satoshi's Page,
Hello, hello, everyone.
and I'm Thomas Hunt from the World Crypto Network. Moving on to issue one. Issue one. If institutions are buying, why isn't the Bitcoin price going up? Bitcoin price not soaring despite institutional billions. Why profit taking and derivatives are holding it back with a breakout looming. Victoria Jones, why is the price of Bitcoin not skyrocketing and doubling? Or Ben Ark first, sorry. Why is the price of Bitcoin not skyrocketing and doubling and tripling? Everyone's buying. What's going on, Ben?
Which one? Me? Me?
You, Ben. You're
You
first.
confused me through a
I
curveball.
confused everyone.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense, I suppose. It is a bit weird, because the exchange reserves, Bitcoin reserves are at an all-time low, and then you got these big strategy type treasury companies hoovering up all this Bitcoin. But there was quite an uptick, and then during that uptick, with all the Trump getting into office news and whatever else, everyone was, they were all hodling and they were gripping onto their Bitcoins with an iron fist, crystal diamond hands. And now that we're going sideways, a lot of people are selling and there is a lot of sell pressure. I think it was like 250,000 coins or something, which have been sold over the past couple of months. That's a significant amount. So if you've got, I don't know, strategies hoovering up 500,000 coins over the past couple of months. And then you've got 250,000 being sold off just by general retail. I think most of these treasury companies are probably doing OTC as well. They're just buying over the counter from whales and things, rather than pulling the Bitcoins from exchanges. So it does kind of make sense. It makes sense that there was a lot of people holding onto their Bitcoin. Supply was very short because everyone knew the price was going to go up. We had the halvening, we had all the Trump news, and then the price goes up, and then everyone starts dumping some Bitcoin to, buy a house, do whatever they do when they sell their Bitcoins. So there is quite a lot of pressure pushing it down, but then there's also an awful lot of pressure pushing it up too. So that's hence why we are going sideways. And then eventually we'll run out of sellers, and then the price will probably just tick up. I know there's more derivative trading as well, but I don't think it really matters too much because these treasury companies, they are hoovering up actual real Bitcoins.
And their plan is to just hold them too. They might lend them out and do all kinds of things, but they're going to hold them. As we showed you from the article, the Bitcoin sellers are mainly 1 to 5 year Bitcoin holders offloading during the bull and then holding on during the bear. They've also said they think a lot of Chinese miners from 2013 with stacks and stacks and stacks of Bitcoin are selling. And as Ben mentioned, the open interest of other Bitcoins and derivative such figures. Victoria Jones, why isn't the price of Bitcoin up more? Everyone loves it. All the banks, they all love us now.
Yeah, well, I think I sent you an image earlier, didn't I, of Bitcoin distribution? Because if you actually look at that, this is something that I've put together for the Bitcoin Starter Guide that you can now get via my website. But if you actually look at this, the ETFs and the businesses are actually really a tiny proportion of the overall distribution of Bitcoin. Everyone talks about these companies buying big numbers, but when you look at it, when you look at their impact on the overall market, it's still pretty tiny. And of course, Bitcoiners who've been around for a lot longer know that, this tends to be the point at which Bitcoin is reaching its peak. Obviously, we're not getting the dramatic highs like we've had in the past, but in 2017, for example, it was very retail dominated market. And of course, everyone was going into a frenzy thinking this was the point at which the financial markets were about to collapse. And so all individuals wanted that Bitcoin. But of course, we're in a very different environment now. at that point in time, I think a lot of retail investors were trying to escape the financialization of the world. But of course, a lot of these Bitcoin companies are part of the problem. And so them getting involved in Bitcoin has kind of taken away a bit of the magic of Bitcoin, I think. I mean, us purist Bitcoiners understand where it's going, and we know that ultimately true Bitcoin will disrupt all of that. But of course, it has yet to play out. And of course, it seemed very exciting in 2017, and now it's not so exciting. That kind of rebel spirit that everyone was buying into has been kind of like, oh, damn it, we're now up against the big guns. And even though there are the few individuals who managed to get a whole load of Bitcoin right at the beginning, even though they're still the large majority of the holders, who knows whether or not they still actually have access to that Bitcoin, or whether or not, some of them could be holders that have lost it. In the UK, we've got the example of the guy who's desperately trying to find the server that ended up in the dump. But that's just one public example of it. There may be many others where that has happened, and they're too afraid to actually come out publicly and say that's what's happened to them. And so actually by keeping that a secret, it's supporting the market as well. So there are lots of things that are going on. But I mean, I think, with a lot of the businesses getting involved, even though they seem to be buying large amounts of Bitcoin, there are also people behind the scenes who've held Bitcoin for a long time, and this is their opportunity to sell because they know that we're getting towards the end of the high point of the cycle before we end up going into a dip again for a few years, which will happen. It never seems like it's going to happen at the time, but it always does.
Well, let's see, Victoria, to go through this chart a little bit more. It shows here the black number, individuals holding over 1,000 Bitcoin, incredible whales. And then individuals also holding 1,000 to 10,000, next little frame here. Then the large scale here, individuals holding less than 1,000. Then there's the lost Bitcoin here, the to be mined Bitcoin, which is impressive to see how small the to be mined is. It's really percentage wise not that important on this chart. Then you see the ETFs. Then I think this is Satoshi Nakamoto, followed by businesses, governments, and miners. So the ETFs are getting a little larger than Satoshi, but it is neck and neck there. So it's interesting to see how the distribution is going to work out between all these players that didn't want anything to do with this 10 years ago and now are just dying to get in. I do think it's sad, and we're going to talk about it more in the next topic. But the main thing I'd say now is the meme is that the retail doesn't know you can buy less than one Bitcoin. They used to hear Bitcoin was 10K. They'd say that's too expensive. Now they hear Bitcoin's 100K. They lose their minds about how expensive it is. Yet you could put $100 in, you could put $1,000 in. It will be worth more. Maybe it doubles. And like Victoria said, that rebel spirit has not reached the retail markets. They're not into Bitcoin. They see it as something now for banks only, large financial institutions that could hold something worth $100,000, ridiculous amount to any normal person, and to people who are already rich. They think that the people who've already made the money on Bitcoin, they missed their chance. Yet, of course, we know that chart still goes up and to the right. It doesn't seem to stop. So it's interesting that they continue to sit on the sideline, and retail is not involved in this current upswing. Let's go to the exit question. Predicting the price of Bitcoin, of course. This could affect it, the large amount of derivative interests, other people trading paper Bitcoins. The darkest word that Satoshi, who hated the mortgage crisis, created Bitcoin, would have ever heard is paper Bitcoins. Ben Ark, will the price of Bitcoin be higher or lower this time next week?
And ironically, the paper Bitcoin could cause a future financial crisis, which would be a real irony that the thing built to prevent financial crisis causes the financial crisis. Well, it doesn't. It's human stupidity trying to do what it usually does. Up. I think we're going to be up. Higher.
I think it would be beautiful and delicious irony. Victoria Jones, higher or lower? And what kind of irony do you think it would be?
Yeah, I agree. We're definitely heading for that kind of irony. And, I've predicted it several times. Bitcoin is an irresistible force moving towards an immovable object, where the immovable object is slightly less immovable than the force is irresistible. And so, it's an inevitability. But, the timing is really what what's at stake here. But in terms of price, yeah, I think we seem to have done quite well this week. So yeah, could be on a good trajectory. I'm going to say higher for next week.
Of course, as you all know, the ball was correct last week. The ball is correct this week. The ball is correct every week. And now, will the price of Bitcoin be higher this time next week? Signs point to yes. Signs point to yes, which are, the most accurate of all predictions, these signs. Moving on to issue 2. Binance founder declares 0.1 Bitcoin, the future American dream. 0.1 Bitcoin, 1/10 of a Bitcoin. Bitcoin's worth around $100,000 right now, so that would be about $10,000 invested. CZ from Binance declares this to be the American dream and the future of wealth, especially now with the new report from the United States saying that housing authorities could allow Bitcoin to be used as mortgage reserve capital, meaning that you could hold your Bitcoin, use it as capital to get a mortgage, i.e. a loan that you could use to buy a house without having to sell your Bitcoin. Thus, 0.1 Bitcoin is the American dream. Victoria Jones, is this true? Are people going to desire Bitcoin, or do they still want houses, vacations, mansions, giant yachts, weddings in Venice?
Yeah, well, I think, most Bitcoins who understand how Bitcoin works recognize that it's even more desirable because it's about the fact that it's an asset that you can't make more of. Whereas with houses, I mean, you can have a number of them suddenly destroyed in a war, and you can have a number of them suddenly rebuilt. The housing crisis, the number of houses that are available fluctuates, not just with whether they're created or destroyed, but also with the population. That also implicates supply and demand. I knew a property developer just before the pandemic broke out who was investing in property, and I was like, well, what happens if the pandemic wipes out a load of the population? It's not going to property is not going to have the same kind of appeal because you haven't got as many people to live in them. So and that's even accounting for things like holiday homes and stuff. At the moment, we've got this manufactured demand where people don't just use homes as places to live, but they also use it as a savings vehicle because it's been an asset that's hard to replicate compared to the paper of the fiat system. But we've now got Bitcoin, which is even better than that. And the only reason why Bitcoin hasn't taken over as that store of value is because it's taking a while for everyone to figure that out. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely invest in Bitcoin over housing any day of the week. It's one of the reasons why I rent. So I even, I tested that in my private life. So yeah, I mean, I think zero point 0.1 Bitcoin is something everyone should be striving for right now, as a minimum, just try and get hold of one as soon as you can.
It is still shocking. In 2010, this was an obscure software project, and I looked at it and I was like, well, the people that got in it are at $1. They're the really smart ones. The rest of it, us blew it. And I also thought, how are you going to convince people to get into this? It's obvious that, holding them is the big deal. Buying before $1 was smart. We're all stupid. Then it went to 30, then it went to 300. And then by 2013, I looked at it again with Coinbase and BitPay and other companies supporting it. I was like, wow, this could really take off. This could be the thing. And since then, you just try to hold as much as you can. But it's amazing to see, of course, CZ from Binance, but the larger world recognizing it with the attempt to use it as mortgage collateral. Ben Ark, what do you think about CZ's prediction? 0.1 BTC is all you need. It used to be 6.15 will get you hot babes or something, but now 0.1.
Yeah, I remember back in the day in the Reddit groups, it used to be 1 in a million. When you're in the 1 in a million club, that's when you had 21 Bitcoin. Gone are those days. And then it was, I guess it was probably 1 in 21 million or something. And then they kept going down the expectation. I think he's right. And I think Victoria's very accurate. There's been a systemic squeeze on all the avenues in which people could have normal people, retail investors could have a decent return on investment. So if you look at the housing market, for example, not so long ago, you could buy a house, do it up, rent out to somebody, and then get a good return on your investment. Like all these traditional avenues you would have to park your money in, you can no longer do and have the same return on investment, and the amount of effort you have to put in to have a return on investment often outweighs the money you're making. So like, I mean, the reason for this is there's just too much money sloshing around. The money print has been turned on. All this money splashing around, capital needs somewhere to go. So capital just explores all the different ways where it can make its owner some money by offering ROI, good ROI, and then all those pools eventually start to dry up. And lo and behold, there's this thing which is the fastest increasing asset which has ever existed in history. So that's where the capital will eventually go, and it doesn't require that much effort. I mean, you just buy the thing and just hold it, and it's probably going to go up. If you wait 5 years, you'll probably be rich off the back of it. So, yeah, it is going to go up in value by quite a substantial amount. And if you do have 0.1, then in 10, 20 years time, you probably will be in a very good position. So it's wise words, really. Everyone should have 0.1. Keep that to one side. Don't spend it. At least, obviously, stack as much as you can.
I think Ben is totally correct here, calling out the previous large hold Bitcoin memes. The one I remember previous was 6.15 BTC. And as it says here, the 6.15 BTC was also created by CZ, who is currently pushing the 0.1 Bitcoin meme. The tweet was from CZ, August 25th, 2019. He suggested owning that just one Bitcoin would place someone in the top 0.3% richest people in Bitcoin terms. With only 21 million available, CZ argued that even a single Bitcoin represents significant wealth and exclusivity. Enter American Hodl, a allegedly well-known Twitter account who responded to CZ with humor and a challenge claiming that owning 6.15 BTC, 6.15 Bitcoin would lead to eternal riches and big titty bitches. So, there you go. Just another humorous and fun Bitcoin meme from the past. Like Ben said, we're down to 0.1 now. We were at 6.15. We were really at 1, though, is what he was saying. And before that, like Ben said, 21 Bitcoin, maybe 100 Bitcoin or 1,000 Bitcoin if you're of
I
that.
mean, American Hodl's probably correct. Like if you're at, I suppose 600K now, you just want to get to fiat escape velocity, where the average of the price going up outpaces your fiat outgoings, and you can just chip away at it, spending a tiny little bit to live your life, whereas the average amount in which it goes up outpaces that, and you continue to get wealthier. If you get to that point, stay there. Don't go buying your Lambos and your big titty bitches.
I do just think though that it's so obvious if you've been watching the show for a little while. We've gone from a point where a normal person could own one Bitcoin, or as the meme suggests, perhaps 6.15 Bitcoin, to now zero point 0.1 is suggested. So if we follow this trajectory, the next time that CZ will tweet this will be in 5 years, and he'll say 0.01, which gets really tragic because I recall spending that for drinks and maybe a magnet at a Kings game and a variety of other incredibly small purchases that would not be significant wealth. But likely in 5 years, he'll tweet that 0.01 Bitcoin is enough and that would give you significant wealth. So we'll keep an eye on this as this story develops. Moving on, check out worldcryptonetwork.com, where we've got some shorts, and we're going to try to develop some more shorts at worldcryptonetwork.com and on YouTube. Moving on to issue 3, Texas ready for $10 million Bitcoin purchase after governor signs bill for state reserve. Texas is getting a Bitcoin reserve, and they're going to contribute it, actively investing millions of dollars of the people's money into an unspendable Bitcoin reserve that can never be spent because it would be a disaster. Ben Ark, or let's go to Victoria Jones. What do you think about the Bitcoin reserve in Texas? And can they ever spend it? Won't it be a disaster if the government spends the Bitcoin and the next year it doubles? And then the next year they can't spend the Bitcoin? How will they ever pay for any services with this Bitcoin?
Well, I think anyone who's considering the future understands why it's worth having some Bitcoin in reserve, because ultimately the fiat system that we've got at the moment is destined to fail. It's a mathematical inevitability. The only thing we don't know is when that's likely to happen. Um, and at that point, once we get to the stage where Bitcoin's been widely adopted in that kind of situation, the only funds that a government really has is any Bitcoin that they've held on to as savings. And presumably it will have risen enough in value by then that it's actually worth something. But I think the critical thing to recognize is at that point, the government's ability to spend is going to be much more constrained than it is now. It's not that they won't be able to spend anything, but they're going to have to be much clearer about their priorities. And and the thing is, as you've seen throughout history, those governments who aren't clear about their priorities, that's the point at which it's game over. I mean, that's how the Roman Empire collapsed. They got to the stage where they had abused their currency and they couldn't afford to pay the soldiers anymore, and so they couldn't defend their nation. And it's the same thing with governments. The way in which governments defend themselves these days is through the legal system. And if they can't afford lawyers and if they can't afford to run the courts, the whole thing becomes a nonsense and it's no longer enforceable. The world will operate in a very different way to the way that it does now. And so, understanding that it's worth having some Bitcoin in reserve. It's not just individuals who are doing that, but, governments as well. But, predicting how the world will operate and even the relevance of government in that kind of environment. I'm not saying they won't, there'll always be a need to have some kind of central organizing function, but it will be very different to the way that it is right now.
I just don't see a future where the people ever get any value out of this. It doesn't seem like smart investing is the job of the government. If it was, why wouldn't the government have bought Apple stock after the Forrest Gump movie like everyone else? Texas will have to spend this Bitcoin. When they spend it, it'll be a disaster and the articles will start. Texas could have held their Bitcoin and had this much money. Texas could have held. Maybe they'll do the derivatives thing and they'll find some clever way of selling it, but not selling it, which again is not something we're in favor of as Bitcoiners, right? The whole Satoshi thing, proving what you actually have, not having the derivative loans in the boxes. It seems like a catch-22, a disaster. They're selling people the fallacy of a rich government, as if the government were rich, that services would improve. But of course, if they improve those services, they would sell that Bitcoin. Then they wouldn't have the money anymore and they wouldn't be rich anymore. I think the most likely avenue for this Bitcoin is corruption or theft. The government will screw up and have a poor custodian, or by the time the government's ready to spend it because it's so-called the right time, it'll be a totally different government with totally different goals, and the people have no idea how that money will be spent. So it's very questionable to me that we're suddenly backing governments buying Bitcoin. Sure, it's great. It's a large investment into Bitcoin. It pumps everybody's bags. Fantastic. And for me, not very libertarian to be the one standing up against government. I'm like the last line of defense here, Ben. What do you think about the government buying Bitcoin, especially a state government like Texas, which relies on the national government, which is now potentially could be seized by the national government as well, so on and so forth?
I mean, if you look at the budget of Texas, it's a pretty small amount. It's 0.004 of their budget. It's $10 million really isn't that much money. I actually think it's more of a strategic. Maybe Texas wants to expand the Bitcoin industry, and it needs clarity over regulatory stuff. So one of the best ways to do that is you just buy and hold some Bitcoin, which will probably go up in value, and you'll probably make money from it. But then alongside that, you then have to define what that Bitcoin is. And that's good for the general industry of, Bitcoin companies which are operating in Texas. There is a bill, a companion bill, which comes along with Texas buying the Bitcoin, 4488, which means that it's quite hard for them to sell the Bitcoin. So even if there's a regime change, or a crisis within Texas, it's hard for them to sell the Bitcoin, from what I read in the article. Obviously, that could be superseded, and like you say, the federal government could just take the Bitcoin. But I think it kind of makes sense. They want to dip their toes in that industry. There's lots of miners who want to operate from Texas. They need clearer regulations, and they need to sort of clear oversight from the SEC, and they need to be able to define what this thing is. And it's kind of bullish news, really, in a way. It's like enough for them to wet their beak, have a bit of skin in the game, and then have enough for it to actually impact the industry in Texas, which is, you know, it's a prime location for mining because of its, you know, solar stuff. So yeah, it's good.
Well, I can hear the bee cashers ringing their bells in the audience, but it does seem like the digital gold meme that's been adopted by the general public, especially the institutions, leads to this. And Michael Saylor, of course, with the ossification of Bitcoin meme, the end of Bitcoin programming and improvement, is this neutered Bitcoin, this Bitcoin that you hold and don't use, this Bitcoin that is not programmable money. It's wrong. Bitcoin is digital gold and ... digital gold and something else. And that's why I don't see this for Texas or for the other states. It's a bet against the dollar. It's a bet on Bitcoin, and it's a bet in favor of dollar collapse. So this global currency Bitcoin, the government is now funding their own destruction. It doesn't make any sense. Victoria, does it make any sense that they're doing this?
They are colluding with the funding of their own destruction, but I don't think they have a choice because the destruction is a mathematical inevitability. So, you know, it's in that kind of situation when you can see the storm coming or you can see the war coming, you build a bunker. And I think that's what any sensible person would do. But I agree, you know, it is facilitating the death of the dollar, but the dollar was going to die anyway. So, you know, it's what would anyone else do in that situation?
I'm trying to pull up a good response to the book here. There's a book about this actually in 1973 called National Suicide, Military Aid to the Soviet Union, written by Anthony C. Sutton, a great unknown historian who you should all read. And what he basically says is during the Vietnam War, the United States was funding the Soviet Union that was funding Vietnam that was then attacking them. And that there was this circle going where the money was destroying the very people the money was trying to protect, and that we were fighting ourselves. And I think they're seeing this again with the banks and the states now buying Bitcoin, that they're just hastening their own demise, that they're committing, you know, bank suicide and national suicide on a massive level here. And I think
Well, of course, countries are just puppets of the bankers. So is that a surprise?
I suppose so, but they're being really transparent about it. Maybe too transparent at this point. They should work on a little cover, a little fig leaf. But we'll see how it turns out. Because again, they think they've controlled this Bitcoin. They think they've tamed it. They've made it digital gold. All of us anarchists and whatever are gone, pushed down out of the conversation. Yet at the same time, all of the properties of Bitcoin are still there. All of the properties are still intact. And nothing that they've done or said, even though they've bought millions of dollars worth and they have conferences and everything now, none of the properties have changed. Go ahead, Ben.
My mic's been weird again. Yeah, you're right. Bitcoin doesn't care who owns it. It doesn't. It's completely ambiguous as to who is holding the Bitcoin, and that's a very important property of Bitcoin. But I think it kind of makes sense. Like, to play devil's advocate, this thing is designed to attack all the power structures of the world. But if a country embraces it, so if you look at the US dollar, for example, like the thing which gives it value and worth around the world is the US economy and US military. And if the US plays a large part within the Bitcoin, if the Bitcoin's the new future backbone of the world's economy, and the US plays a big part in that industry and just actually owns a whole bunch of Bitcoin, then it gives that economy value and gives by proxy the US dollar value. And if the soft currency of US dollar continues to exist, then probably one of the best things it can do right now is accumulate Bitcoin and embrace the Bitcoin industry. So I think you're right. I think there's a bunch of incentives at play.
Wouldn't you make a bigger bet than $10 million? And wouldn't you bet it from Washington, not from Texas? Like, are we going?
Well, I mean, it's enough. Like I said, it's enough to get some regulatory clarity in Texas so they can have more industry there. And it's not so much that it becomes contentious among the population of Texas, for example. So
I think we're in a really unique place where Bitcoin is so hard to understand all of the properties to truly understand. Like Gabriel Devine used to say, he would say, you have to be multidisciplinarian. You have to be a cypherpunk and a libertarian and into finance and into history and all these different things, or you're not going to understand it. I think that they have thoroughly misunderstood it. They have a 5-second understanding and they're rushing to adopt it because they read in the new Wall Street Journal that they could be just like the remote Himalayan kingdom Bhutan, right? But Bhutan started mining Bitcoin in like 2013, right? They took an early risk on something that's early. All these middle and late adopters are rushing in and they think that they're still early adopters and they're going to get in and get all this wealth. I just don't know. I think it's
I mean, I think you have the you have the idiot presidents and then the idiot like spokespeople for government, and then you have the people who've been in government for decades and they're working at Rand and wherever else, and they're not idiots, and they know what Bitcoin is and the existence of Bitcoin and how what the US's role should be in Bitcoin's future. And I think it's probably partly a strategic play to have some exposure to the industry and then also Bitcoin as well to keep themselves as relevant and keep the US dollar relevant. And then also, like you say, there's some naive assumption that the alphabet agencies can exert some control over Bitcoin and stop it from replacing the USD as the world reserve currency, for example. But I mean, they're like they're damned. If they were to completely ignore Bitcoin, we would criticize them. If they were to completely embrace Bitcoin, then we would criticize them for trying to co-opt the protocol. If they just buy a little bit of Bitcoin, we're going to criticize them. So basically, we're always going to criticize them, aren't we? But I actually think the relationship they have with Bitcoin currently is kind of it's kind of as good as it could be for them, as long as they don't start dictating, which they are through proxies or whatever else, dictating how that it should ossify and the protocol shouldn't advance. But there we are. Whatever. There's all these different things at play. But I think strategically, the US is actually probably in the right position when it comes to Bitcoin currently.
well, just before the show, I was watching Joseph Moyers and the Power of Myths. I think I messed up his name, Bill Moyers, and the Power of Myths and Joseph Campbell. And what they were talking about is I don't think this old government idea fits with this new world that we're in, with the technology we have. Because I started to break it down in my head. I was like, what could the government do that we wouldn't criticize them for? And I got to something very simple where I was like, they could break down all the things they're doing and kind of govern by wiki. Like, I really want to see everything publicly. I want to see all the spreadsheets. I want to see all the data. I want to analyze it, probably with the AI. I want to know what they're doing and look at the books kind of thing with grids and graphs and success, right? But it doesn't seem that the old government metaphor is going to transition into the new government that we know we can get from the internet. We know we can get this kind of data-driven government, good or bad. It could try to achieve these goals. And this government we have right now is not data-driven, not trying to achieve these goals. It's like they don't know anything about Google Ads. They're not iterating their advertising, they're not iterating their services. They're so far behind. They seem completely disconnected. I think it's very unlikely that we upgrade the current government metaphor. It's much more likely that we have a huge disaster and catastrophe setting back the world, like in the foundation books, the collapse of Trantor and the collapse of the administrative state and the government, setting us back 10,000 years, dark ages, unless they develop the foundation, kind of a historical patch to get us back to where we were. It just seems like an incompatibility. I don't see these two things coming. And I stand as a generation on the bridge of the analog to digital divide, where I saw the old world with the card catalogs and the old things, and I see the new world with the digital, and I don't see a bridge or a transition. I see a complete break.
Well, if you look at like representative democracy, it's, hundreds of years old technology, far predating the internet, at a time where most of the population was illiterate, and you would hope that their friend would read to them some political pamphlets so they could be informed somewhat so they can then go and vote for somebody. So yeah, clearly we're like way beyond representative democracy. But it's kind of like there's there's two things at play. So we have all this great new technology, so you can have more direct forms of democracy. But then in the same regard, that Hegelian stability which you get from slow moving institutions, I kind of agree with in a way. Like it's you don't want overnight revolution. Everything gets turned upside down. You end up with power vacuums, and then people flood into those power vacuums. So like these systems of government, or they need to update to the new paradigm of the internet existing. And like you say, it could all be on Wiki, it could all be using Bitcoin payments, and we could see exactly where all the sats land and whatever else. But then that's, that's sort of in the opposite. So that there's like a push and pull between that idea and then just the idea of, slow moving government, because actually stability and slow moving change in institutions, government institutions, actually means, stability in a country. So it's a tricky one. Yeah, but we're certainly at the point where it is ripe for an upgrade. And I think maybe that might be something which is, they're potentially forced to do, because people will just start taking control for themselves and just upgrading for themselves. They'll just, they'll start organizing locally more, and organizing online more, and outside of the remit of government, and they'll build tools and applications which just slowly erode the necessity of government and those age-old institutions.
Well, I mean, I know the UK government has certainly is definitely engaged with the idea of blockchain technologies. I mean, even as far back as 2017, I remember going to a trade fair where someone was talking about all the different categories where blockchain could be applied. The problem is they're still living in this delusion that they can continue managing the world as it's always been managed. And I think what a lot of people don't recognize is the fact that our existing fiat system is intimately tied into how government operates as it is right now. And the thing is, the system of money that we used has a huge impact on the way in which society operates. Before we had government, we had monarchs. And the way in which countries operate is, one king would invade another country, and whoever won the war would end up taking over, and then they'd be able to institute fines and take over the property. I mean, this is how Henry VIII, became wealthy, because he just trashed all the monasteries and stole all their treasures. That's what happens when your money is a physical asset. And so going from a physical asset to having paper money managed by banks was actually an improvement. Unfortunately, we've just got to a stage where that system has become so corrupted, it's necessitated the invention of something else where we want less corruption and more transparency. But the way in which we manage that transition, I think there is a way to do it. I think if governments are actually engaging with the technology, but without the delusion of thinking that they can continue the way they have been, it means that, you are going to need more transparency, and more transparency with a money that can't be corrupted means you're going to have to make very different decisions than you've done in the past. And it's going to be a huge shock, not just for the government, but also for the population.
I do think, Victoria, like you said, that transition management is very important here. And it means that you have to accept that the old system's going to fail. If you're building a lifeboat, if you're putting so many resources into this, like they did in the Foundation series, where they literally sent scientists to a planet at the edge of the universe and told them to write a galactic encyclopedia that would solve the problem, but really they were planning a new government and a new civilization. That's why the Texas bet against the dollar seems so cynical to me, and short-sighted. If that is their belief that Bitcoin will replace the dollar and so on and so forth, that's not a good thing for government to be doing. And a lot of people have predicted for the long time things like the last grasp of the old world, the end of the World War II generation, the baby boomers, the end of history. For a long time, they talked about a demographic shift in the United States, that there wouldn't be a white majority anymore, that Latinos, African Americans, other groups would then constitute the majority, and that the white majority would have to deal with this. And previously, a lot of people thought this will be great for the Democratic Party. The new Latino supergroups and so forth will support the Democrats. This is horrible for conservatives. But we've actually seen the opposite, where many Latinos and these new groups are conservative as well. And we're having kind of a last grasp of this conservative movement as a reaction to President Obama. But I think it's more than that. I think that it's going to come down to technology, and that what Trump really, in a way, represents is this old world. He doesn't email, he doesn't text, he doesn't use a computer because he's paranoid about it being used against him in trials. And he's correct. That's been a great strategy for him in his life. Most people can't afford to not use computers, but he's been able to pull it off. But I think technology's changed, and it's strange to see them use so much technology to weaponize propaganda against people. Meanwhile, we have ChatGPT. We have this superpower. You could see through propaganda. You could think complexly. You could talk to the computer in detail about subjects. But there's this giant disconnect between us and the government. There's no path. There's no liquid democracy where your votes could change, your fluidity could change. If people don't like this guy, as it's clear they don't have to wait, arbitrarily 4 years, or wait the election. The results come in, and then on January 20th, 3 months later, we put in shine the president, because that's how long it took to manage the elections in the old days. None of these things match up to a new world where you can send an email or an instant message. That you should have a government that's more like your email, more like your instant message. Although we've seen responsive government can also lead to tyranny as well. So as part of our government is that it's designed to be slow, but everyone's forgotten that, and they want it to be fast, and it's leading to fast tyranny, as the founders predicted.
But then, go back to where democracy started in the ancient Greeks, and every Greek citizen had the right to visit the agora and speak their mind and have a say and speak up and, put their point of view across. And that was a daily event which everyone could go to. Obviously, they had slaves to do everything else. So I think with the internet being the way it is, and people are being as formed as they are, that it's probably not a bad direction for us to go in. Is there's some sort of online agora of some sort or other where people can vote? It might be a terrible idea, but yeah.
Well, it'd have to be structured like the other systems. So you don't have this tyranny of the majority where they can just all agree. But I do agree, Ben. I think that we need a form of direct democracy where the people can vote directly, or you could give your vote to a representative as a proxy. Then they could vote with your vote. But if you decide you don't like what they voted for, you could take it away. You can't undo the vote, but you could take it away and give it to someone else so that it could move more fluidly, like similar to the parliament system, where you could throw out the parliament, bring in a new parliament. It doesn't happen just on a 4-year basis. We're completely frozen here. We have to wait 3 years, allegedly, maybe 2 years, maybe a year and a half if they hold a fair midterm election. But there's going to be no change in the current system. And to have, compared to the phone, where everything changes so instantly, it's anachronistic. It seems old-fashioned.
But the anarchists would say you have direct democracy, and then you have also direct action, which is what we can do with Bitcoin. And so we can just buy some Bitcoin, opt out, and then slowly wither the powers of state.
Spoken like a true libertarian. Great work, Ben. Moving on to issue 4. Bitcoin loans are back, rewriting the book Celsius burned. Bitcoin lenders are betting that tighter controls and clearer risk management can rebuild a sector still haunted by the collapse of predecessors Celsius and BlockFi. Previously, when you loaned out your Bitcoin through these institutions, they would rehypothecate, a clever word for them loaning out your Bitcoin again, and perhaps loaning out dozens or hundreds of times your Bitcoin in the rehypothecation, i.e. creating value, creating paper wealth. The new companies say they're not going to do it, and there's even major players like JP Morgan who might be involved. Victoria Jones, what do you think about the new Bitcoin lending? Totally different than the old Bitcoin lending.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I know what they're saying, which is, there's now more responsibility. But of course, what that means, it's relying on the systems to be more honest and more regulated, which is fine as long as the existing system lasts, which has the power to enforce regulation. But of course, this is the Bitcoin parasite. Ultimately, the code of Bitcoin is more powerful than that legislation. And all you need is for something to go wrong in the existing financial system for the price of Bitcoin to crash. And all of those algorithms get crushed. And I think we even said it earlier, wouldn't it be ironic if paper Bitcoin actually ends up being what crashes the existing system, getting us to the place where Bitcoin is the only thing that anyone trusts and is prepared to transact it anymore. I think we're still a long way away from that reality, but these are the mathematical inevitabilities that now exist based on the structure that we have. And I think a lot of the arguments with the ETF and the idea of digital gold and ossification of gold, is actually a ploy by the existing financial system to freeze the threat of Bitcoin, because it's when Bitcoin actually circulates in the economy as a currency that it will do the most damage. And I think those that operate the financial system understand that very well. They haven't been, they tried to chase down whoever the inventor of Bitcoin was. They couldn't manage that. They then had the blockchain, not Bitcoin narrative. They couldn't manage that. They then tried CBDCs, and apparently then, the digital one is now failing in China. So they couldn't manage that. It's a last ditch attempt, and it's still a very recent attempt to try and get digital gold to, stay as digital gold. And okay, we'll let you have Bitcoin, but only as digital gold. That this far and no further. But of course, the fundamental design of Bitcoin means it's inevitably going to be, you know, that. Up until 1925 in Britain, it was possible to go to the bank and change your pound notes for gold coins. And the only reason it stopped was because Winston Churchill introduced a law that said you couldn't do it anymore. And FDR did the same thing when they confiscated gold in the US. Circulating gold as a currency is what gives the population its fairness in trade. The moment they took that away from the population, that's the point at which the fiat system really started to be disadvantaged against the population. And you can see it in charts of, how poverty reduced in the 1800s and then went flat from about 1920. The fact that gold does not circulate in the economy is a direct it has a direct impact on the level of poverty that we're experiencing in the world today. And because all of that data is obscured, very few people recognize that. So, we have to have Bitcoin as a form of circulating gold. That's what it's designed for. And that's the point at which it benefits the population. Keeping it as a form of digital gold is in service of the existing financial institutions, and they're pulling the wool over your eyes if you think that that's in any way meant to be benefiting you. So yeah, it's only a matter of time before that message becomes a lot clearer because it needs to.
I think you're definitely right, Victoria. It was a huge right of the people that they could go to the bank and trade in their money for gold. They lost it. Most don't even know they lost it. They all think it's there. People still think we're on the gold standard in the United States. We haven't been on it since Nixon. That's getting further and further away in the past as the years go by. Personally, though, looking at the Bitcoin lending, it's nice to see large players like JP Morgan in there. In my mind, that says big bank backing and that your money would be safe because they have lots of money. Although we know that's only perceived safety. Maybe the bank makes a bad bet. Maybe they're too big to fail. Maybe they're not. Maybe they get backed up by the government. Maybe not. I was just looking up on Google, which strangely and terrifyingly transformed into Google AI and was acting like ChatGPT with no other options. And it reminded me that Bear Stearns failed, but Lehman Brothers was saved. So you never know if your Bitcoin loan is going to be held by the company that fails or the company that succeeds, although I do think it's getting safer than it was before. Ben Ark, what do you think about the Bitcoin loans and what Victoria said about them trying to keep Bitcoin as digital gold and these loans being another way of Bitcoin something you let the institutions hold for you?
I think like the tool set of Bitcoin, and we have this programmable money where you can have things like time blocks. And I think I mentioned on the show before, you have something like Firefish. Whereas if you get paid in Bitcoin, you don't want to spend the Bitcoin right now, but you need to pay your rent. You can defer spending that Bitcoin to a year or 2 years in the future with the assumption that it's probably going to go up in value because that's, traditionally what the experience in which you've had. And then at some point during the lifetime of that loan, you can pay the loan back. And if you don't, you can just default on the loan. The person who's lending you the fiat gets their APR, and then you get whatever's left over, which could be probably more than you would have spent on the thing in the first place. And it's something which for me was niggling in my brain on the last pizza day, and I was thinking about Laszlo with those pictures of his kids eating that pizza, and I was thinking if he'd have that kind of mechanism where he didn't need to spend the Bitcoin there and then, he could spend the Bitcoin effectively in the future, then he would potentially have more Bitcoin. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. If you know something's going to go up in value, and if you're pricing goods and services in something which you know is going to go down in value, which is your local fiat currency, that's not like some collateralized Bitcoin loan. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's a new tool of the market which people can use or not use. It's up to them. I think the problem is if you then start wrapping those as sort of packaged financial instruments, which you can then trade around in Wall Street, that's when you have the real systemic risk because you just can't balance the books. Whereas with programmable money, you can see it, it's time locked. Everyone's going to be made whole or whatever, or the person who lent you the money is going to get their money no matter what. Then that's not a bad thing. I think and it shouldn't be tarnished with the sort of general funkiness that Wall Street are probably going to get up to with Bitcoin. But I mean, like, these people, they just want more ways of making a quick buck, and Bitcoin for them is this new investment tool which they can create these loans and then package those baskets, like bundles of those loans, and then trade those on Wall Street and whatever else. And then you end up back in 2008. But I do think there is something really interesting when it comes to collateralized Bitcoin loans for like micro lending. I was trying to work out a way with Ellen Bits how we can have like how me and my shop, how I could be paid in Bitcoin, but the person who's paying is paying with a card payment, just a fiat payment. A micro lending marketplace with collateralized Bitcoin loans could be a way for that. I get my Bitcoin. They are able to buy something in cash. I actually get more Bitcoin than the thing's worth because I'm effectively creating this micro loan. So there's definitely something there. And we are in this unique position where you have an asset which is increasing in value significantly, and then you have this currency which is which is priced in, which is decreasing significantly. So yeah, it's we'll see. We'll see how it all rolls on. And Thomas, I have a quote for you when you called me a libertarian on the last topic. The interference of state power in social relations becomes superfluous in one sphere after another, then ceases of itself. The state is not abolished, it withers away. Who said that?
I don't know, Marx.
Yeah, it was Marx and Engels. There we are. So I can talk about withering of state. It's all right.
Very good. And I think that going back to Laszlo, I think he's going to be used as an example in every single commercial for these loan products. But unfortunately, he won't see a dime for it because you don't need him to be in the commercial. You just put the words on the screen. Someone paid 100,000 Bitcoins or 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 pizzas. Da, 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 da. Don't be like that. Which again reinforces this digital gold, don't spend Bitcoin, don't use it as a currency meme. It's like the people are being taught to cut off their hands. They're like, cut off your hands. Don't send around Bitcoin. It's this incredible international currency that can go anywhere for pennies. You can move hundreds of thousands of dollars for pennies across the world. Don't use that feature. Forget about Bitcoin features.
But then practically, a friend of mine bought a house 3 years ago. It was worth 100 grand. Now it's worth 200 grand. Sold the Bitcoin to buy the house. The Bitcoin's now worth 700 grand. Like the thing which she would have used for collateral over that loan for that period of time, if he were now to, default on a loan, on a Bitcoin collateralized loan, he would get like back 550 grand or whatever it is. And he would have originally, whereas he spent, he's not going to get that money back because he just spent the Bitcoin, bought the house for 100 grand. So there's certainly something there. We shouldn't discredit it all.
No,
Well,
there's definitely something to it, but it'll be the bankers it'll be the people who understand finance who'll make the most advantage of it. And of course,
Which is kind of the point. Like we shouldn't just let Michael say they just run away with this thing and make a ton of money and stack all that Bitcoin. It's like, why can't normal people, this is what Firefish is cool for. Like my friends who get paid in Bitcoin, they use Firefish, and they sell less of their Bitcoin to pay for their lifestyles, and that's kind of cool. It's like it gives them the same tool set which Michael Saylor's fiddling around with. Like, it
Which
shouldn't
is
be the
fine right
preserves of these
now.
gazillionaires.
Which is
Yeah,
fine right
absolutely. Yeah.
now, but it's like, do you remember that time where there was there was a whole movement where people would use 0% credit cards and they'd just go from one to the other until all of a sudden the 0% credit cards didn't exist anymore, and anyone who had any debts left on it were committed to 24% because they'd built up so much debt on these 0% credit cards. I mean, it's great in the beginning for the people who understand how it works, but of course, when it stops working, that's the point at which everyone is on board, and it's like all the lemmings are about to fall off the cliff because they didn't understand what the long-term implications are. Yes, it's great now, which makes it a great selling feature, but the thing is, when it stops working, like Celsius and FTX, it's a disaster for everybody. There are plenty of people who piled into Celsius and FTX until it wasn't fun anymore. And look at the devastation that caused.
Yeah,
So,
well, but you do, like, aside from the strategies and whatever they're doing, um, we have programmable money. We can time lock a transaction, say, okay, and the conditions of the transaction can be that um the Bitcoin isn't liquidated unless it hits a certain threshold, or um unless a certain amount of time runs out. So, like, the feature of programmable money means that normal people can access holding the asset, which is going to probably increase in value without using something like a strategy or or some like derivative platform or whatever else. Um,
until they get liquidated at
yeah,
the
and but
worst
if they
possible
get
moment.
yeah, but if they get liquidated, then the worst thing which will happen is they lost, the thing which they would have bought would have cost them 10% more than had they just sold the Bitcoin. Which for most Bitcoiners is a risk they're willing to take over like a 2-year period. Um, yeah. I think it's a spectrum of, on one side you've got complete scam, probably going to crash the world's economy, and then on the other side you've got this useful tool, people who are paid in Bitcoin or have Bitcoin don't want to spend it can use to pay for real world goods and services.
Well, and I know we've talked recently about Michael Saylor and how you should sell everything you own and buy Bitcoin and kind of live a really risky life, which we know he's not doing. Still owns lots of things. He's very wealthy. I think there's a disconnect between the idea of housing as an investment versus housing as a home base or a place to live or a chance to have stability in your life. And even Jameson Lopp, hardcore Bitcoiner, friend of the show, tweeted out recently that selling Bitcoin is okay, that you have to live your life, that your life is finite. And if you don't sell a little bit every once in a while to have some fun or buy a house or whatever you want to do, as Mad Bitcoin said, hodl plus profits. You got to take some profits every now and again. Otherwise, what is life for? What was the point of all this? And I think a lot of people are getting trapped in this infinite number go up game where,
Mhm.
if, like Victoria says, if there is another down, I know Saylor has predicted no bear market forever, which is a stunning prediction. I'm sure we'll repeat it in the future. But if it does go down, you're going to feel terrible if you don't sell at the top, if you don't sell a little bit. You don't know exactly where the top is, but if you keep cutting off, 1%, 2% here or there, little numbers, you could do it. But we also have the other side where, like Ben is saying, instead of the house, you should hold the Bitcoin forever. And let's not forget the immortal words of Jay-Z from the song The Story of OJ. I've tried to find hopefully the not censored version of this. He says, "Financial freedom's my only hope. F living rich and dying broke." And this is the key line. I think this is really important. He's trying to communicate this to everyone in clear, plain language. I bought some artwork for 1 million. 2 years later, that shit worth 2 million. Few years later, that shit worth 8 million. I can't wait to give this shit to my children. Y'all think it's boozy. I'm like, it's fine, but I'm trying to give you $1 million worth of game for $9.99. Turn that 2 to a 4, 4 to an 8. Turn my life into a nice first week release date. Jay-Z, The Story of OJ. And every other word in that song is the N word. So I'm really censoring it. If you go listen to the real word, it's the real song, and it's a cool song and stuff. But yeah, every word is inappropriate for this show and so forth. But still, he's trying to communicate you the wisdom of pretty much what we're saying with the holding some Bitcoin, the 0.1 Bitcoin. That is your Picasso. That is your, and sure, you got to trim a little, get a boat, get a yacht, get a car, whatever you got to do. But at the end of the day, you want to try to hold that Picasso to hand it down to your children so that you can have this generational wealth that Jay-Z is talking about.
Yeah, I wouldn't trust Jameson Lock because I mean, Casa, they've got a new Bitcoin reserve treasury product. So he's just trying to get you all to sell your Bitcoin so their treasury product can buy it up and then hold it forever and not sell it and still make money.
There's always a financial instrument. There's always a game. There's some kind of a deal on something. But we're running out of time, so let's go to predictions or story of the week. Victoria Jones, are you ready with a prediction or a story of the week? Go ahead.
Yes, my story of the week is I've been working hard on the next course that we're producing on our website. The the one we've got now is building a Bitcoin node, which I've produced with Darren. There's a little intro video on the website that you can see to have some insight into it. Initially, when we started making these, we thought we'd just do YouTube videos that we'd produce on YouTube, but actually, putting them together, there's a number of different camera angles that we had to use just to kind of make some sense. And working together, it turned out to be so much work. It was just like, we're going to have to turn this into a course that we're going to monetize. So we've monetized it, but it's not the crazy prices that you often see for online courses like 9.99. This one's £80, and we've got a discount code from anyone on the World Crypto Network that wants to purchase it, which is WCNODE, so WC Node 40. And I'll say that again, WCNODE 40. And that gives you a 40% discount if you purchase it before this time next week. So anyone who's interested, take a look at that and hopefully you find it useful. This one's just getting you to put together the hardware. And we've shown you how to download the Umbrel software. This is just so that you can practice figuring out how to run a node. We've got another course coming up later where we actually teach you how to download Bitcoin Core, because obviously that's better for more financial sovereignty. So we've got a number of these coming out, but we're trying to spread it out a bit just to spread out the workload. So yeah, take a look at that. You're interested, and if you know anyone who wants to build a node, it's a good way to start. We're trying to design it for beginners, because the idea is, at the end of the day, if it's going to be money for everybody, part of what keeps the system decentralized is people being able to know how to run a node, how to operate them, how to maintain them. And we've also got the next course that we do is going to be on node maintenance, where we talk about, how to use your node to vote on the network and how all of that works. So we cover a number of those details. So yeah, so check it out if you're interested. And people who subscribe to my newsletter tend to get a 50% discount when it first comes out. So, if you are going to be interested in some of those courses in the future, I would encourage you to subscribe to that, because it'll keep you updated as soon as it's available.
And everyone can check this out at satoshispage.com. Satoshispage.com. Thanks, Victoria. And
Thanks, Tom.
also check out Majorca Blockchain Days. I think we're pretty excited. Everyone's getting set for it. I've got my flights and stuff booked in. Are you obsessed with Bitcoin and liberty? We are too. Join us at Majorca Blockchain Days 6, July 10th through 13th this year in Palma, Majorca, Spain, Europe, the world. Victoria, I know you're going to be there. We're hoping that Ben can get it together, but it's a great conference. It's really small, really fun. Anything, Victoria, you want to say about the conference? Help promote it if anyone's out there on the fence. Maybe they're thinking about going. And of course, there'll be online panels and videos and stuff coming out from the conference as well, so you can experience it online if you're not near Majorca.
Yeah, it is a good conference, and there are a number of us now who go regularly. And so it's, because it's small, it's a really good way of actually getting to talk to people. Whereas some of these big conferences are just a bit too overwhelming. And I have a great boat trip on the Sunday, which is often the highlight of my year. But yes, this will be the 5th year that I've spoken at this conference now, and I'm hugely grateful to Chris, because he gave me a platform when nobody knew who I was, and I've been going there ever since. And yeah, it's the highlight of my year now, so definitely worthwhile if that's what you're interested in.
It's pretty cool. Check out these speakers: Victoria Jones, Jed Grant, MZ, Amir Taki, our friend of the show, Vlad Costa is going to be there, Christian Rutzel, Peter Todd, alleged Satoshi Nakamoto, and of course, Ben Ark and Thomas from Electron Wallet, also friends of the show. Ben, what do you think? You're still listed as a speaker, but I hear you might not make it. Anything you want to say about Mallorca Blockchain Days? Anyone in the audience is thinking about going? We'd like to see you there.
Yeah, I felt guilty then when I saw myself listed as a speaker, and I was like, God damn, I haven't even got a passport. I'm gonna try and get my shit together. I lost my passport, and I'm not very good at not losing passports in the
You
UK. When you
physically
lose,
lost it, Ben. You got to clarify.
yeah, physically lost my. No, I didn't lose it like in a in a gnarly Amitaki type way. I don't know how he can still travel around with all his shenanigans, but oh, God bless him. No, I lost my passport in a clumsy way, not in a cool way. You know, it wasn't like freaking some freedom fighter somewhere. And when you lose enough passports in the UK, it becomes really hard to get another passport. And you have to go over like a meeting with Secret Service, and they need to make sure that you're not selling them to ISIS or something. So hopefully I can get one of those in the next couple of weeks and come along, because it is honestly like it's one of my favorite conferences in that. Look, I mean that when you see that picture there with everyone on the boat, that's pretty much the amount of people who go to the conference. And then when you look at I don't really like the term signal, but having people like Thomas from Electrum and Amir Taki and Root Soul and Victoria, and like there's just such a high density of quality people who were there. And it's very relaxed and informal, and people kind of speak their minds, and they present stuff which perhaps they wouldn't present in a bigger conference. But it's a retreat. Whenever I go, I come away feeling happier and healthier and nourished, and then enriched by just hanging out with a whole bunch of cool Bitcoiners, like OG cool Bitcoiners. Um, but it's also very welcoming, and we all just have a laugh, drink a bunch of beers, go out on the sea. It is wonderful. It's lovely, really lovely. And being Mallorca as well, Mallorca's it's such a nice spot in Mallorca as well that they have the conference. Um, but yeah, I very much hope I can either, well, I mean, yeah, get a new passport. I think is I'll try and get a new passport or smuggle my way into Europe.
You've got 2 weeks, Ben.
I've got 2 weeks to try and get one of those. The problem with those interviews too is they ask you a bunch of questions which I'm really bad at, such as they'll literally ask you, oh, if you were to walk from your home to this location, what roads would you take? And I don't know the names of roads. It's something which I've never been out to. I've never known the right names of roads. I just kind of, I could describe it for them roughly. So like, they ask you those sorts of questions. They're really probing questions. So I'm not looking forward to it, but I'll try. I'll try my best. I'll pay the couple of £100 and see if I can get a passport in time.
That'd be great, Ben. It would have been so easy if you guys were still in the EU. You could have just gone down, no problem, no passports, no
Well, I
country.
still needed a passport when we were in the EU, to be
Uh,
fair. But we get the shorter queue, which is nice.
all
So
right, let's move on to Ben. Do you have a prediction or a story of the week? Go ahead, Ben.
story of the week is can I have a bit of screen sharing love, Thomas? Giggity
Yes,
giggity.
it's on now. Go ahead.
Um, all right. So, yeah, story of the week is there's this crazy new PR from Vladstan in LM Bits. So now if you're a super admin, you can go to fiat providers and you could add in Stripe or Square. And then you're like, well, why are you polluting this beautiful Bitcoin software with your horrible fiat shit? But I can literally create an amount in here, so say £10. Or I say GP, why is GBP? GBP. Um, £10. And then I can say I want to pay with Stripe, create invoice. And then this creates a Stripe payment link for £10. And then it goes through the same sort of account system that we have for Bitcoin and Allen Bits. So then it's like, well, why would you do such a horrible thing to such a beautiful piece of Bitcoin software? Well, an example is this extension I've been working on, which is Sell Coins. So you can, with Sell Coins, you can create a front end public page, and then you can sell Bitcoin. So accept fiat payments, and then email people like an LNUR withdraw, so they can buy Bitcoin over Lightning. So it kind of like for onboarding and for a whole bunch of other extensions, it unlocks a whole bunch of stuff. So it was kind of crazy that Vladstan was able to one of the developers who works on the bits was able to wrangle that into the Allenbit software. But I think it's pretty dope. Like once upon a time, many years ago, I created a little platform and I sold a little bit of Bitcoin on there, about 200 quid. And it was just a kind of a WooCommerce. And I think I sold like 200 quid worth of Bitcoin in about 20 minutes. And then I got scared and turned it off because I was like, I don't want to be arrested. So I turned it off. Whereas this empowers anyone who's running Allenbits with the tools they need to sell Bitcoin, and then just send a public page around locally and say, if you want to buy some Bitcoin, come buy some Bitcoin. Obviously, operate it in in the way in which your laws in your local jurisdiction, blah blah blah. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I'm kind of excited about it. And then yeah, some other stuff I want to build too, which I want to go into.
Well, it sounds great, Ben. It's a neat way to send Bitcoin around. I think it'd be fun to sell Bitcoin that way. I have more movie reviews this week, in case you guys are interested. I would say check out The World According to Allie Willis. This is a documentary about Allie Willis, who, as the poster says, the most interesting woman you've never heard of. She wrote the songs September, Boogie Wonderland, Neutron Dance, the theme song from the TV show Friends, the Color Purple musical. She was a huge influence on Pee-wee's Playhouse and Paul Rubens, as you can probably see from the colors in this image and the style in which she dresses. She was also an early internet pioneer. Mark Cuban was the CEO of her project Willisville that was never created, but she did receive hundreds of thousands of dollars of funding from Intel and other companies as she attempted to put her version of what sounds today like NFTs and a metaverse online. She wanted to create a whole universe that you could go into in the early internet. We're talking like 95, 94. She had these ideas. She was incredibly influential through parties, all kinds of stuff. Check out The World According to Allie Willis and check out her songs. She's got a lot of really cool songs there. They're very poetic. She's a songwriter like Joni Mitchell, like a singer-songwriter kind of thing. If you haven't seen it yet, check out Pee-wee as himself, the incredible documentary about Pee-wee Herman, the best documentary I've seen since the Tom Green documentary, which is also really worth seeing. Tom Green directed it himself, went into his own mind, went into his own past. In the same way, Pee-wee or Paul Rubens attempts to take over this movie, conflicting with the director, trying to tell his own story, and it's a fascinating story. Finally, a fond goodbye and farewell to Bill Moyers, who used to work for LBJ. He was huge on PBS as supporting democracy as a journalist, and he did this incredible series that you should go watch right now. I hadn't seen it. I'd read about it. He does a series, Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myths. And this is where we get all the talk about Joseph Campbell, the hero with many faces. He interviews probably Professor Campbell in detail about myths and his ideas. We're going to play just 49 seconds here of Bill Moyers, an incredible journalist.
Hey, do we ever know the truth? Do we ever find it?
Well, each person can have his own depth experience and some conviction of being in touch with his own Satchit Ananda, his own being, true consciousness and true bliss. But the religious people tell us we really won't experience it till we go to heaven, till you die. I believe in having as much as you can of this experience while you're alive.
My bliss is now.
And I think in heaven you'll be having such a marvelous time looking at God that you won't get your own experience at all. That's not the place to have it. Here's the place to have the experience.
Here and now.
Here and now.
Here and now. Here's the place to have the experience. Bill Moyers at 92. Incredible person. Thanks so much to everybody for joining us. Be sure to give us a thumbs up down below and push subscribe. Thanks for saying hi in the chat, and be sure to leave us a comment afterwards. We always check to see if we get any comments. We don't get that many, but it's nice when we do. So thanks so much for joining us. Until next time.